Thank you. It was in April 1973 when Martin Cooper, an engineer at Motorola, made the first cellular telephone call. The cell phone then weighed 2 pounds. You had to charge it for 10 hours to get a 30-minute talk time. And it costs $4,000. $4,000. Compare it with today, when the cell phone has almost become a commodity and is available in prices ranging from $4, we've had our first cell phone scam also in India, to about $1,000, depending on which model you pick. The second interesting data point is, India is the only country in the world where we have 4 billion cell phone recharges every month. 4 billion cell phone recharges every month. I'm just trying to set the context with different kinds of data points. The third interesting thing, Cisco brings out something called the Virtual Networking Index. And as per the 2015 Virtual Networking Index, the growth in global data traffic today stands at 4,000 times what it was just 10 years ago, and 400 million times, watch the number, 400 million times what it was 15 years ago. And that is about 3.7 exabytes per month. So clearly, data seems to be the way to go. And last but not the least, despite the more sobering figures shown by Neeta in her presentation, Mary Meeker of KPCB seems to suggest that 2/3 of all e-commerce in India is actually m-commerce, and a lot of investor money is flowing towards it. In fact, I recently read that there is a startup which shows you how to tie a sari. A startup which shows how to tie a sari, which has got $200,000 in funding. So that should tell you how investors are looking at putting money in India in different kinds of startups, not necessarily mobile. So let me first start with Sanjeev to my right on how does he see the investor perception of the mobile landscape. Have you put in a lot of money into mobile companies? And do you really think the mobile first strategy, followed by a number of e-commerce companies, and some of them went back on it, is that the future? How do you see investing in mobile likely to go?
Thanks, Srivatsa. Few months back, I was, for the first time, I attended a session done by government. It was called Startup India. And probably only session in last 5 years I have attended from start to end. And for a person who has very low attention span, the quality of speakers I think that session had was amazing. And one gentleman who was coordinating a panel was Jehant Sinha. So I could never imagine a minister coordinating a panel, and I could never imagine a secretary of Karnataka government creating a panel. So I think it is a great sign of change that our country is experiencing. Coming back to what we do with mobile, we were set up about a decade back, and our belief was that India is an under-penetrated internet consumption market, and someday it will take off. And I think all of us are very, very surprised by the way things have gone in last 5 years. About 2 years back, we set within Helion a division called Mobile Internet Business. And we had to actually dissolve that division last year, because almost every e-commerce business, almost every transportation business had moved to mobile. So internet is mobile. And as Srivatsa said, as Mary Maker has said, that most of our companies are experiencing very high transition to the internet in last few years. So we really don't differentiate between businesses that leverage the power of consumer internet, because most of it is happening on mobile. It's a different issue whether it's happening through a web interface or through an app interface. And indeed, the sectors that we feel are very exciting. Any entrepreneurs, prospective entrepreneurs in this room who are looking to build companies, or is this a different audience? Yeah, so the sectors that we have found get disrupted, I think, are two. One is retail. I don't know whether you've been following. India has about $10 billion of GMV in terms of retail, which has gone online. And as Neeta pointed out, 7.5 billion probably was mobile, so that gives you a sense that retail is on mobile. And that is actually only 1.2% penetration of our retail. So what's coming ahead, actually you can predict from what's happened in the past. Retail is $600 billion sector, 1.2% disrupted, versus China and United States, where that number is about 10% plus. Our entire digital market cap is 30 billion. China is about 1 trillion and US is about 2 trillion. So I think the sectors, and I don't want to monopolize this conversation, that we are most excited by are retail. And the second one, I think, where there has been a huge disruption is transportation, starting from Make My Trip, which was the pioneer of disrupting transportation, to companies like Redbus and then Ola. These are all the type of companies that are beginning to benefit from mobile, because these are mobile only businesses. So if you don't have mobile, you don't have that business. And the last point I'll make before I hand over to the next panelist is that we are at very early stages of businesses that are driven by engagement, and then engagement leading to transaction. And I'll give you 3 examples. One is a company called Rail Yatri. In India, one of the toughest things to know is when will the train arrive. And Rail Yatri is a crowdsourced application which, taking customer data, is able to tell you when the train will arrive. And the engagement numbers on that application are phenomenal. And once that is downloaded on your phone, then you can order meals during your journey. You can book your taxi at the time when you reach the destination. So I think that is a very interesting example of starting with engagement and content and then beginning to monetize offline, which was one of the themes of today.
With the very expansive vision of Digital India, which has been painted by the Prime Minister, especially which hinges on both content and connectivity. And many believe that one of the areas where this government hasn't done much, me included, you included, as per your interview yesterday in the media, is Digital India, where the policy and initiatives haven't supported the PM's vision. Now, how do you see Digital India happening in the next few years with the bottlenecks in connectivity and BharatNet not growing as fast as it should, and the financial requirement for that, which is huge, and there doesn't seem to be much clarity on that. So, and without that happening, much of the mobile internet that we are speaking of will probably remain a bit of a pipe dream.
So let me come back to the quick answer to your question, which is that I therefore believe that the private sector in this case also will be a big driver, as it was in the case of the mobile. And while the broadband and BharatNet, etc., are government efforts, they are desirable, they are probably required, because for the backhaul, unfortunately, the availability of such optical fiber infrastructure is important. But I think a lot of the last mile connectivity will also be through wireless, and especially with the advent of 4G and with the auctions of 700 megahertz also in the offing, And there's a huge amount of spectrum available there, which is free and available. So subject to some of the concerns and some of the legitimate concerns that operators have on the reserve price for 700 megahertz. But once that becomes available, that could also be a game changer. And let's not forget also that there are some players who are entering the telecom services game with a completely different paradigm from the existing players, where they are not looking at the connectivity as being the main source of income, but the content which that connectivity enables as the main source of income. It's completely different from the game that the current set of players are playing. The moment you have something like that coming in, then it could actually turn everything on its head. And therefore, I think that if we are able to see some of that happening, then we could see a dramatic alteration in the whole picture. We also see that there are players who are actually offering last mile connectivity at zero cost to the government in very short periods of time, using very experimental kind of technology, but nonetheless at no cost to the government or anyone else. And while there are some other concerns, relating to those offers, it's not as if therefore there are no breakthrough solutions which are possible on the last mile connectivity. And I do believe that India will be playing ground for some of these radically new ideas. There was an MGI study, McKinsey Global Institute study, which said the use of disruptive technologies in an imaginative way in India's social mobility, analytics, cloud, and so on, could unleash as much as $500 billion to $1 trillion additionality to the GDP annually by 2025. So I think there are a lot of opportunities which are lying around, and critical to that really is having a game plan. And therefore, that is the broader context, and the idea of Digital India and all the thought process behind it by the government is exactly what it should have, and it's absolutely the right thing to do, and it's certainly a very laudable example of the government leading. But, and this was again the point that I had made the other day in the media interactions, it also needs to be supported by policies in other areas. So you can't have a Digital India priority in one part of the government and all other policy making arm, whether it is taxation or regulation or business conduct, pulling in the other direction. So I think that the outlook or the prognosis is that there are a lot of opportunities. The fact that the government is focused on this means sooner or later these bottlenecks will be recognized and addressed. And then with all these other factors that I mentioned, these could prove big game changers in the entire paradigm. So the curve may see a step change, is my short point.
Right. Sri, if I can come to you. Taking off from what Mr. Shekhar said and Sanjeev mentioned, where do you think are the bottlenecks to the adoption of mobile in India? And do you think content will drive connectivity or connectivity will drive content?
Sure. So let me just set the framework a little bit. And I would agree with what Sanjeev said, that there is a massive opportunity as far as mobile is concerned. I also want to be a little cautious in terms of some of the projections that come out in the media. And let me start by saying that first of all, when we talk about GMV today of about $10 billion, it's somewhere in the range of $10 to $14 billion in India. China on one single day, it's called actually Singles Day, does about $14 to $15 billion in GMV just on one single day. So in terms of opportunity, I think it's massive. But I also want to point out that I think India is actually more than 10 years behind China. We're a $2 trillion economy. China is between 9 and 10. So I think even if we were to grow at 7 to 8%, we're not going to get there in 10 years, probably closer to 15 years. So I think we just need to be careful a little bit about, where we benchmark ourselves against. That's number one. Number two is that, I want to go back to some of the data that Neeta presented. And there are a lot of opportunities. There is, I think, a massive headroom in terms of where potential users would come from. I just want to point out that some of the challenges are the fact that, when you look at consumption in this country, where does consumption really come from? And I want to talk about this in the context of the impact it's having on telecom operators, which is not inconsequential, because at the end of the day, economics have to work for telecom operators so that, this whole infrastructure can be put in place so that all of you can create the mobile e-commerce applications and therefore you can make money out of it. If you look at over the course of the last 20 years, voice was the killer app, then SMS, and now given the fact that those profit pools are draining, and it's really coming because of OTT applications and so on, that the fact is that the telecom operator economics are actually under threat. That's number one. Number two is that when you look at the difference, one primary difference between China and India is that when you look at social media, social networking, you don't have the challenges of multiple languages. You didn't have that in China. And the other thing that I want to point out is that no one's investing significantly in local language over here. You're not going to get the next wave of growth, that Neeta talked about. If you're talking about rural consumers, but rural consumers don't know English. I'm making a generalization. I don't want to be, but it is true that at the end of the day, that when we talk about the 15 million consumers today, it is the tip of the iceberg. These are the people who understand, who have the sophistication to sort of interact on social media, to do m-commerce, through primarily English. Now, there is a lot more to be done in making sure that we do provide access, not just through local language, but also ease of use. There needs to be voice interactivity, and I think AI learning systems can play a big role also in terms of increasing ease of use. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about last mile, which Mr. Chandrasekhar talked about. It is a big concern. I want to point out one thing, that India is the only country, only major economy in the world that has not had an incumbent telco make massive investments in wireline. Every other major economy has done that. We have moved away into what we think is a purely wireless world. I just want to point out, there is no such thing as a purely wireless world. A lot of the traffic, in fact, most of the traffic still goes through fiber. You need to have fiber infrastructure in place to make sure that all the things that you're putting in place on mobile can happen. And it's a big concern. Backhaul connectivity through microwave is only one part of the solution, but it cannot be the solution. So I agree with Mr. Chandrasekhar. There needs to be still investment to be made to make sure that all the m-commerce applications, that m-commerce is really enabled through the investments in the backhaul. And I'll also say that, all the moves that the government is making in terms of putting money into the hands of I would say, the bottom of the pyramid, is now going to also fuel the next wave of consumption. I'm sure, Dilip is going to talk about it. We are putting money into accounts. You're putting enabling systems like payments through UPI. But now we have to make sure that the applications that are getting created also are accessible to those people to whom all this is being put in place. So that, I think, is going to be the next big challenge.
So what are the steps NASSCOM is taking in partnership with government or by NASSCOM's member companies on the mobile front, especially with respect to growing the market, as also on where do you see the mobile broadband? What do you think are the key steps by which mobile broadband will grow in this country?
I think that from a NASSCOM perspective, what we see, particularly to drive the content that I referred to earlier, which would be a big driver. I believe that a lot of this will be demand-driven. I am not a great fan of supply-driven in this case because, first of all, the supply has to be created by the government in this case, and that has its own set of issues, and we've seen how that's a bit of an issue. So given that, this is going to be demand-driven, a lot of it is going to be driven by content. A lot of it is going to be driven by applications and innovative applications built around, interesting and possibly unique business models. There is a recent consultation paper which TRI has put out on free data, which allows data access to be made free for a certain set of consumers. We know that there are some kinds of packages which have been a bit in the news in the past, which have not been accepted, but that doesn't mean that all options for free data are off the table. In fact, the TRAI consultation paper today is the last date for the submission of responses. We've also given our response. So I think that the combination of new applications, innovative applications, and innovative models of making data access available to consumers at low cost is certainly going to be a big driver. And we have, through our 10,000 Startups initiative and a number of other initiatives, been supporting a lot of the entrepreneurs in coming up with new applications. That's something that I think we very strongly support. As far as the broadband is concerned, also, as I said, once people acquire the taste of these kind of services and applications, I believe that the stage would be set for consumption of other kinds of services which require broadband. If you take skilling as an example, and all of us are aware of the global trends where the nature of jobs and the nature of skills that are going to be required for those jobs are continuously changing. And for a lot of people, employment will actually remain a distant dream unless they can quickly acquire certain skills. How does a person in a rural area acquire different kinds of skills? Because these skills may relate to a lot of the traditional kinds of work also. Again, that is something which, if it is tied up with suitable apps and content and broadband, can actually create a lot of demand. So such applications we believe can be a significant driver. Just as one example, ultimately anything which leads to more money in the hands of rural people as opposed to less. So this is, I think, the broad direction in which at least we are trying.
But if you look ahead, sir, the hood point to bring you in and ask you how big a game changer really is UPI. We hear numbers that personal expenditure in India, about 95% is still cash.
Is in cash, right.
And only 5% is electronic.
That's right.
So tell the audience a little bit about what is the potential and promise of UPI, and also what are the risks? Because obviously there must be some challenges of doing this.
Right.
And though we hear in the first year of implementation of direct benefit transfer, you had saved $3 billion with just 120 million transactions.
That's right.
I want you to give us a sense of the true potential as well as risks of UPI.
No, I completely agree with you. I think everything comes with the two sides of the game. But when we started looking at why UPI, I think this is the answer which will answers to this question we'll have to look at. And IMPS was operative last 4.5 years now. We do about 25,000 crore in terms of value every month. However, we have not been really able to get the large low volume transactions on IMPS. And we started thinking about internally, externally, what are the issues in IMPS which we need to address. While it gave completely great opportunity to get the transactions real time, 5-second response time, connects any bank to any bank, any wallet to any bank to any wallet, right? So while IMPS gives these many features, why it could not get the low value transactions? So first we believe is, the exchange of the information, right? If somebody has to exchange 11-digit IFSC code, which is alphanumeric, and 15-digit account number, right? For a 500 rupee transaction, nobody's going to do it, right? So that's point number one. So we accepted this fact, and that's why the ticket size on IMPS is very high and predominantly used in remittance than the P2P. The second thing which we looked at from IMPS standpoint is onboarding is very, very tough, right? If you are banking with 3 banks and want to download the mobile banking solution of these banks, and everybody has a different process to onboard, right? So you end up in kind of doing one, doing other. There's kind of issues on that side. The third issue which we thought is the checkout process for the bank accounts. While wallets have done a great job in terms of giving a great user experience, and that's why you see A lot of people using wallets for low-ticket transactions like mobile top-up and other things. Bank accounts and mobile payments really hadn't taken off because the checkout process was very difficult, right? You had to do the two-factor authentication plus no interoperability. So we tried to address all these issues in UPI. So one is, we came up with a virtual address, right? So for example, Srivats@SBI, right, becomes your virtual address. And you could simply give it to anybody and, the payment can seamlessly go through. The second thing is we introduced the pull part of it, which was completely missing in the Indian payment system. Today, most of the payment systems are push-driven, right? So whenever the sender wants to give money to the other, it's more from pushing the money to the other person. In UPI, we have a pull, so I can just pull money Srivats@SBI. Notification will come to your mobile, and you can just enter your MPIN. That's a single factor entry, compliant completely to RBI 2FA system, and transaction would fulfill. The third thing is we are trying to get QR code scanners and those kind of things. So even I don't need to even enter Srivats@SBI. You could just generate a dynamic QR code on your mobile, and I just scan it and pay directly back to you. So those are the things also are already integrated. Some of the banks have integrated QR code readers and those kind of things, which can kind of create a completely seamless transaction processing experience for the users. We also looked at how we are also building the Bharat Bill Pay system, right, which is a interoperable bill pay system. We are trying to see how UPI and BPS give a seamless user experience for the bill payment, which is again 80% predominantly on the cash side. Yeah.
Now, what are the challenges to the UPI? You've told us all the good things.
But
what are the risks of doing this? And what is your timeline for adoption of the UPI in India?
So we are looking at, first from a timeline standpoint, launching it by end of July, right, with about 15 banks giving their apps. Obviously, user can choose any app and start doing the banking because it's completely interoperable. So you need not, if you're a SBI customer, you can download any other bank app or vice versa. Plus, it allows one-to-many. So you download one app, you can add 5 bank accounts and start doing the banking. You don't need 5 apps. Similarly, you want to use one account on 5 apps, one-to-many, many-to-one. All relationships are possible. Realistically, I feel it will take 6 to 9 months' time for people to really know UPI, downloading the app and start using it. But I believe in 12 months' time, if you're able to get 10 million downloads and an active usage, I think that would be a good success from a UPI standpoint. That's an internal benchmark we have kept. However, I believe that the risk standpoint is, the download, again, somebody has to market the UPI, right, to the common man. So I think some banks have to spend money on the marketing side. We believe that there is a lot of merchants are excited about the UPI. So we want, Paytm, Flipkart to embed the UPI into their app, and that can help the number of download to increase and adoption to increase. So banks have to drive, merchants has to drive. So I think the one risk on UPI is we have to market it well, we have to drive it well, right, so that the people start using it, right. I think so. That's another one big risk which I see. In terms of usability, I don't see much risk because, see, earlier, if there are 50 players in the market, we wanted all 50 to get it right? In UPI, if out of 50, five guys get it right, good apps, right? So I'm sure the users would like those 5 apps and start downloading. So from that standpoint, we don't see much of the risk on the from a consumer standpoint. If competition will drive the innovation, and banks will start innovating, start giving a lot of layers on UPI in terms of value-added services, mobile bill pay, split bill services, P2P services, lending services.
Do you really see it having an impact on the subsidy regime, given the fact that in LPG alone, the government has saved about 3 billion in 120 million transactions in 1 year?
No, I agree, and I don't know how do we really correlate the direct impact of the UPI on the economy. But today, if you look at the cost of cash to the economy, and for the remittance services, where people are spending a lot of money to nearly about 1% of the money to be given to the agent, I believe that cost can come down to 10% of what people are actually spending. So, and plus, I'm sure the fast movement of money kind of helps circulation and in terms to the GDP.
So, 2 questions. One is, how do you see, what kind of apps do you see coming from the private sector, especially from entrepreneurs in this room might be keen to know this, who can build based on the UPI framework? That is one. And second, what do you think is the future of money? What happens to money in all this, especially with the kind of transformational change that the UPI brings?
So we believe we see a lot of interest in terms of startups on using UPI, because we have created an API-driven platform. So a lot of people have been hooked onto our sandbox, trying to test out the APIs.
What kind of?
So so many cases we see. So just to give you a few high-level, people are working on a split bill cases. People are working on chat-based transfers, chat-based money transfers, or
is that actually possible?
Yeah. So that's what people are working on. So I don't know whether I'm disclosing too much, but people are working on many apps. People are working on small ticket canteen-based payments, small ticket mobility-based payments. So a lot of apps are coming over and a lot of interest on UPI side. I don't know how much time it would take to really look at chat-based services being very popular. I've heard China is a big use case. Many of the in-store offline payments are happening on WeChat, right? So I believe we are heading into that direction. Timeline is I'm not very sure how much time it will take, but I think the people are looking at investing in those innovative stuff to look at how quickly, how simple is to get the payments.
Let me ask you to make a prediction.
Yeah.
10 years from now, this 95% cash economy,
yeah,
where do you think it will be 10 years from today?
So I think all of us have agreed to the fact that we can't be cashless. So everybody, all communications will see less cash, right? So all of us are very clear that
is 50 a fair number? You think 50%?
50, I think it will be a victory in my assessment, right? Because if you look at large countries like US, even they are at that particular level. So I think 50 is a great number to achieve.
Okay. All right. To end on that note, I'd like to thank all my panelists for taking out their time and coming for this panel, especially Dilip, who's come all the way from Bombay. I'd like to thank Neeta and the entire VCCircle team for bringing us together here. And I think we've come a very long way from the $4,000 mobile, which was not so far away. And I predict, and I'm willing to have this bet with any of you in this room, that the day is not far when the mobile as a device and a high-end smartphone will be given away free to the consumer, probably subsidized by the government, in exchange for ad revenue and pushing out government transaction, which will be the true game changer, because the volume of transactions there will be so huge, which will make up for whatever is the cost of the mobile phone. Thank you very much for your time. Very, very grateful for all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.